Hi guys, welcome to this video on Act 1, Scene 7 from Macbeth. And in this scene, we're going to see Macbeth expressing some doubts and worries over the murder of Duncan. The scene starts with him making the decision that they're not going to do it. There are lots of reasons why it's a bad idea, and he's going to speak to Lady Macbeth and he's going to call it off. This is then followed by an exchange between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, in which she persuades him to go ahead with the murder of Duncan by challenging his masculinity. And as such, this scene deals with themes around betrayal, themes around gender, and love and relationships, and what we would do to sort of satisfy the relationships that mean the most to us. Let's at least try that one more time. Hi guys, welcome to this video on Act 1, Scene 7 from Macbeth. And in this scene, one more time. Hi guys, welcome to this video on Act 1, Scene 7 from Macbeth. And in this scene, we're going to see Macbeth expressing some doubts and concerns about the murder of Duncan, realising that there were lots and lots of reasons why he shouldn't murder Duncan, and deciding to call it off. This is then followed by an exchange between himself and Lady Macbeth, where she is really quite horrible to him. She questions his masculinity, calls him weak, and all of these other things, and essentially uses his perception of himself against him to persuade him to go through with the murder of Duncan. In this way, the scene explores themes around betrayal and themes around gender. In particular, ideas around gender reversal, very similar to what we see Lady Macbeth saying in Act 1, Scene 4. Okay, so before we look at the annotations, let's just have a little listen to the scene.
If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. If the assassination could trammel up the consequence and catch with his surcease success, that but this blow might be the be-all and the end-all here. But here, upon this bank and shoal of time, we jump the life to come. But in these cases, we still have judgment here, that we but teach bloody instruction, which being taught returns to plague the inventor. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our poisoned chalice to our own lips. He's here in double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed. Then as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. Besides, this Duncan hath borne his faculties so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off, and pity, like a naked newborn babe, striding the blast, or heaven's cherubim horsed upon the sightless couriers of the air, will blow the horrid deed in every eye that tears will drown the wind. I have no spur to prick the side of my intent, but only vaulting ambition, which all leaps itself and falls on the other. Hannah. What news?
He is almost supped. Why have you left the chamber?
Hath he asked for me?
No, not he has.
We will proceed no further in this business. He hath honoured me of late, and I've bought golden opinions from all sorts of people, which would be worn now in their newest gloss, not cast aside so soon.
Was a hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself? Hath it slept since? And wakes it now to look so green and pale at what it did so freely? Ah? From this time, such I account thy love. Art thou afeard to be the same in thine own act and valour as thou art in desire? Wouldst thou have that which thou esteemest the ornament of life, and live a coward in thine own esteem, letting I dare not wait upon I would, like the poor cat of the adage?
Prithee, peace. I dare do all that may become a man. Who dares do more is none.
What beast was then that made you break this enterprise to me? When you durst do it, then you were a man. And to be more than what you were, you would be so much more of a man. Nor time nor place did then adhere, and yet you would make both. They have made themselves. And that their fitness now does unmake you. I have given suck, and know how tender 'tis to love the babe that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from its boneless gums and dashed the brains out, had I so sworn as you have done to this.
If we should fail...
We fail. But screw your courage to the sticking place, and we'll not fail. When Duncan is asleep, whereto the rather shall his day's hard journey soundly invite him, his two chamberlains will I with wine and wassail so convince that memory, the warder of the brain, shall be a fume, and the receipt of reason a limbeck only, when in swinish sleep their drenched natures lie as in a death. What cannot you and I perform upon the unguarded Duncan? What not put upon his spongy officers, who shall bear the guilt of our great quell?
Bring forth men, children only, for thy undaunted metal should compose nothing but males. Will it not be received when we have marked with blood those sleepy two of his own chamber and used their very daggers? That they have done it?
Who dares receive it other, as we shall make our griefs and clamour roar upon his death?
I am settled and bend up each corporal agent to this terrible feat. Away, and mock the time with fairest show. False face must hide what the false heart doth know.
Okay, so looking through the annotation for this scene, we need to consider two things really. The first is, how does this scene develop the relationship of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth? And is it typical for the Jacobean period? You know, is it typical for a wife to talk to her husband in the way that she does? And how is the character of Lady Macbeth developed? You know, how does she become stronger and more controlling throughout this scene? But before we do, let's just quickly go through this soliloquy from Macbeth in which he decides that he isn't going to murder Duncan anymore, and look at some of the language and some of the imagery that he uses to show that he has come to this conclusion. So the first thing, Macbeth says, if it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. This is saying that if the murder was going to be done, then it's best that we just get the murder over and done with quickly. Now in this sentence, we see some conflict within Macbeth's mind. He starts off using if to indicate that the murder is a possibility, you know, that it might happen, it might not happen. If can have a yes or no answer. He then moves on to when, which is a very definite word. It says that it is going to happen. So this shows that Macbeth is internally conflicted around this murder, whether he should do it or whether he shouldn't do it. And I think that he's lost some of that resolve from the previous scenes because it's moving from an idea to an action. He's no longer thinking about it conceptually, he's now thinking about the actual deed itself and the consequences of that deed. And this is exemplified when he describes it as an assassination. He understands that the murder of Duncan in this way would be sneaky and wrong and not considered an honourable way to kill someone. You know, he's not killing Duncan on a battlefield, he's sneaking in the dead of night and murdering him in his sleep. I think it's also worth noting that assassination is different to execution. I think it would be really useful to take out all of the different words for killing and look at all of the connotations around them. You know, execution has connotations with state-sanctioned murder. You know, you execute someone who's done you wrong. An execution also is granted by the king, so it's official, it is allowed. An assassination, however, is not being granted by anyone. An assassination is something that you do against the king. You know, assassination has connotations around treason, particularly thinking about the gunpowder plot. He also hopes that it could be the be-all and end-all, you know, that killing Duncan will be the end of all of the issues, but he knows there will be consequences. You know, he knows that things are not going to work out for him if he does just kill him. Because of this, time. You know, time is something that goes on forever. And what we do today, we will still have to live with in time, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, to steal a Macbeth quotation. So because of time, he recognises these consequences are going to kind of come back and bite him. And I just want to talk a little bit about the metaphor here, upon this bank and shoal of time. Bank and shoal, that refers to shallow water. If you are going out into sea, then the bank and the shoal, that will be the first steps into the sea. And I think here Shakespeare uses it to indicate that Macbeth is at the start of this journey. He's at the start of this voyage into madness and corruption and degradation. And we'll see this metaphor extended throughout the play, showing Macbeth getting deeper and deeper into the waters of time. Okay. He talks about there being judgment of people, that we but teach bloody instructions, which being taught return to plague the inventor. So bloody instructions, you know, that contains that little motif of blood there and refers to the murder. And Macbeth understands that the consequences of this murder would plague him. They're going to be a plague to him. Now, whenever we can, we've got to explore multiple meanings of words. Here, is he talking about mentally plagued? You know, guilt, poor mental health resulting from it, post-traumatic stress from committing the deed? Is he talking about that kind of plague? Or is he talking about a physical plague, something that would damage him physically? So, arrest, torture, murder. I haven't included it, but it could also be, you know, spiritual plague, that he would be rejected by God, that he would find himself in hell. He understands that there are big, big consequences to this murder. He also recognises that it would be wrong to murder Duncan from a social point of view. You know, he says that he is there as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. That in society, if we welcome people into our homes, we should do it with the best intentions. We shouldn't invite someone in and then murder them. We then see some of Macbeth's attitude towards Duncan. He says that Duncan is meek. This is the idea that Duncan is careful and weak, that he is childlike, innocent, but at the same time meek has some negative connotations. If Macbeth believes that Duncan is a weak king, then it might be better for Scotland to get rid of him and have a strong king. At the same time, he recognises that Duncan has been good to people. He says that he hath been so clear in his great office, that Duncan has been kind and fair and nice to people, so much so that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off. This is the idea that people would cry out because he is so good. You know, that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued. This is the image of people crying into the sky and weeping with sorrow because of the death of Duncan. He also understands, through this idea of the deep damnation, that he would be damned, that Macbeth himself would be damned by God for murdering Duncan, going against the great chain of being, going against the divine right of kings and disrupting that hierarchy of the world that Jacobeans believed in. But at the same time, he may be talking about recognition that the world itself will become damned. That removing such a good and virtuous king as Duncan would leave the world in a really, really horrible state. And then he talks about pity. Got that little bit. He recognises that people, once they found out, would spread the word, using this metaphor, that they shall blow the horrid deed in every eye. This is to make all aware. Also, that has connotations around pain. You know, if you get something in your eye, it's quite a painful thing. And then we get a reference to public sadness, that tears shall drown the wind, that nature itself will be drowned out by the cries of people who are so sad about the murder of Duncan. Okay, finally, in this soliloquy, Macbeth says, "I have no spur to prick the size of my intent, but only vaulting ambition, which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other." This is saying that he has no motivation to commit this except from his ambition. You know, he doesn't hate Duncan, he has no reason to murder him really, it's just that he is ambitious and wants to achieve more than he could achieve if he didn't kill Duncan. And this image of him vaulting over itself and falling on the other shows that he believes that by aiming so high, he will fall. And he recognises in this clearly that his ambitions are too high. At the same time, just a couple of final points on this soliloquy. Through his imagery, Macbeth is showing that he understands that this is an awful and an unnatural act, that the people of Scotland will cry out, that their sadness will drown out nature itself. Also, you might want to think a little bit about how do the descriptions that Shakespeare uses for Duncan maybe talk to King James himself. You know, Duncan is presented as a very good king who is loved by the people around him. This is a direct reflection of what King James would like people to think about him. So this is just another way that Shakespeare is talking to King James. Okay, we then see Lady Macbeth introduced to this scene, and we've got to think a little bit about how the gender roles reverse between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth here. So he tells her about his second thoughts, and he uses this really nice metaphor. I have bought golden opinions from all sorts of people. This is worthy praise, and it's worth noting at the beginning of the play, this is other people's attitudes towards Macbeth. This links with the idea of brave Macbeth and all of the praises that Duncan puts upon him. And this shows that at the beginning of the play, people liked Macbeth. Bear that in mind because it will change across the rest of the play. He talks about wearing those new opinions, which will be worn now and then to his gloss. This is another little reference to clothes. We talked about that as a motif before. Clothes representing honour, clothes representing status. That Macbeth would like to wear these opinions and get the benefit of them. We then have Lady Macbeth criticising Macbeth and just all out attacking him. She says, "Was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself?" So were you drunk when you dressed yourself in the kind of the robe of your ambition? When you honoured yourself? When you decided to take control of fate? You know, were you drunk when that happened? She talks about him looking so green and pale, you know, saying that he looks ill, to think about what they could have, you know. She calls him scared to act and to try to achieve his desires. You know, art thou afeard to be the same in thine own act and valour as thou art in desire? Are you scared to take the things that you want? Is what she's saying. And this is developed with this really interesting saying, letting I dare not wait upon I would, like the poor cat of the adage. You know, this refers to inactivity, but this cat of the adage, as it says here, this is the cat that would eat fish and would catch fish, but won't because they don't want to get their feet wet. That has extra connotations around, getting your hands dirty, getting your hands bloody, as they literally will once they've murdered Duncan. It talks about being inactive because of fear of consequence. And that's, very much where Macbeth is at this point in the play. He is inactive because he's concerned about consequence. All of this, very unlike the typical Jacobean wife at the time. She's being really quite forward with Macbeth, quite confrontational with Macbeth. And he responds with, I dare do all that may become a man. Who dares do more is none. So this all that may become a man, this is the honourable killing that we see Macbeth doing right at the beginning of the play. He's saying here that I'm prepared to murder a man in battle, I'm prepared to murder a man when my life is on the line, or to protect my family, and whoever kills people in other circumstances, who dares do more is none. There is no honour in killing people in kind of secretive or assassination kind of ways. And in this way, Macbeth is using his gender to try to demonstrate his power. He's using his masculinity to try and show Lady Macbeth that he is a powerful and strong person. However, Lady Macbeth jumps on this instantly and then continuously challenges Macbeth's gender. She says, when you durst do it, then you were a man, and to be much more than what you were, you would be so much more the man. She's saying that when he dared, he was a man. Now he's not daring, he isn't a man. When he was prepared to commit violence against Duncan, then he was a man. Now he's backed out, he isn't a man anymore. He's lost his masculinity, or at least she's challenging his masculinity. Continue. She says here, so there she's challenging his masculinity. Here she's now rejecting her femininity. She says, she knows how tender it is to love the babe that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums and dashed the brains out. So this shows that at some point in her life, Lady Macbeth has had feminine experiences. It shows that she is prepared to reject those feminine experiences, to deny those feminine experiences. It also talks a little bit about how they've already lost a baby. There is no child in this play, so we can assume that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth had a baby, and that it didn't even die in stillbirth. She was able to feed it, but they lost it. And I think that this links in with, this trauma links in with some of the ideas around Macbeth betraying Banquo later on. There is a certain vein of jealousy that Banquo has children, but we'll get to that when we get to it. She talks about plucking the nipple from his boneless gums and smashing his brains in. This is a further rejection of feminine ideals. Lady Macbeth, bearing in mind, she says, unsex me here. She is rejecting her femininity. She wants to become harder and colder and more able to commit these acts of violence. Here's a really nice idea. So Lady Macbeth says she would do something that goes against her gender. She would reject her gender for Macbeth. Now, if we were to apply this to Macbeth's situation, does this mean that Macbeth killing Duncan is against his gender? That by sneaking into Duncan's room and murdering him in his sleep, that is a rejection of masculinity? And it's something that can definitely be argued. We think about this. Macbeth killing in a war, that is honourable, that is a masculine thing to do. That Macbeth committing an assassination, that is dishonourable and possibly considered feminine. It's just something to think about. But in committing this murder, is Macbeth actually going against his own gender? I think that through a feminist reading, you could definitely apply those kind of ideas. Now Lady Macbeth goes through the plan. She talks about using drink and dance against Duncan's guards. She uses, when in swine sleep, their drenched nature lies as in a death. So It's kind of a euphemism for murder there, that they're going to appear to be dead, kind of. Here, what can you and I perform? This is a really interesting word to use when it comes to the murder of Duncan. It's a potential reference to this being a play, or this all not being real. This again is something that will be backed up as we move across the play, and it's kind of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's kind of existential rejection of reality. But we'll get to that when the time comes. Macbeth recognises Lady Macbeth's masculine qualities by saying, "Bring forth men, children only." He thinks that she wouldn't be able to mother a daughter, that she is a very strong and masculine kind of character. So then, will it not be received when we have marked with blood Will it not be received when we have marked with blood those sleepy two of his own chamber? So when they've covered in blood, but at the same time, marked might be a reference to death, as they're going to have to die. The people guarding Duncan are going to have to die. Finally, Lady Macbeth talks about their deception, that when Duncan is found, we shall make our griefs and clamour roar upon his death. They will deceive those around them. And I think it's really interesting when you actually get to that point to compare what happens in that scene to what Lady Macbeth says here. And finally, Macbeth recognises that the murder is terrible, the terrible feat. Mock the time. This again has an ambiguous meaning. Make false the time. So Lady Macbeth will strike a bell when it's the sign to indicate that it's 1 o'clock. It's going to sound like a church bell. It's going to sound like it is the time. But at the same time, mock the time could be to abuse the time, to deceive the time, to try and make time seem false. Okay, so here's a really important quotation now, and I feel that the final quotation of this scene is at the heart of everything in this play, in the same way that fair is foul and foul is fair is at the heart of everything in this play. Macbeth says, "False face must hide what the false heart doth know." This is showing that Macbeth is going to put on a false face. He's going to deceive Duncan. He's going to pretend that he's still loyal, him and Lady Macbeth, and they're going to give a show that everything is fine and that they are happy and that they are having a great time with Duncan. But at the same time, the false face must hide what the false heart doth know. So that inside him, his heart knows that he's going to kill Duncan. And in a way, that heart becomes false because he has no love for Duncan anymore, or he must turn off all feelings for Duncan anymore. And I think this quite easily could be considered ambiguous too. Is he talking about a false heart that needs to pretend to have feelings, that he needs to play at getting on with Duncan? Or is it a false heart that must have no feelings? Is it a false heart that needs to switch the feelings off because if he feels, then he's not going to be able to go through with the murder? Because actually, when it comes down to it, Macbeth really does like Duncan. He doesn't want to kill him because he hates him. He wants to kill him so that he can become king. Okay, so finally, I'd like to make some points now, just on a piece of paper, thinking about where we're at in this play with Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. This is the end of Act 1. So what have we learnt about their characters? How do they behave right now? Because when exploring characters, we need to consider how they change across the play. In the same way that we did for The Sign of Fall with the characters in that novel, we thought about how did those characters change. So I'd like to make notes on their characters at this point in the play, considering their behaviour, their mindset and attitudes, their mental health, and finally their gender representations, thinking about who is the more masculine of the two and who is the more feminine of the two. Okay, so that's it for Act 1. I'll be back shortly with a video for Act 2, Scene 1. Okay, thanks for listening, guys. Bye-bye.